Good evening and welcome to this special mental health edition of Doctors on Call. I'm Dina Clabaugh, a psychotherapist and founder of Insight Counseling of Duluth and Virginia, and I will be your host for tonight's program on grief and loss. This is the second of 4 mental health episodes that will be airing this season of Doctors on Call. Our program is here to answer your questions about mental health issues that may affect you, your family, or friends. This week's show has been pre-recorded, so we won't be accepting calls or emails. Our expert guests are Dr. Deb Semmelroth, a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Sela Center for Grief and Loss. Coral Popowitz, a licensed clinical social worker and owner of Monarch Counseling Service. And Bridget Benson is a therapist at Insight Counseling, currently on sabbatical. We're so pleased to have you all here. Now let's begin with a discussion of grief and loss. It is such an honor to be with you this evening. I just have such, I admire and respect your work in the community, and it means a lot to me that you would be here. So I'm excited to share this space with you and with this very special topic. We're gonna just jump right in to some discussion. Yeah. So I can't help but just coming off of Thanksgiving and heading into the Christmas holiday. I know from practice and experience that grief symptoms and experiences can exacerbate during this time. Deb, could you share a little about what might be happening for people when they're experiencing this and why this time of year and maybe other anniversaries might be particularly hard?
Well, as we know, many people gather with families and they have everyone around them, and all of a sudden there is an empty chair. And so it's a very lonely time for many people as the Santa Clauses and the Christmas trees and everything is out there advertising for this family get-together. And so there's just this huge yearning for your loved one during this time. So people feel very lost in a lot of ways and struggle with trying to normalize a holiday, trying to figure out how to do this. And so people kind of recommend, there's lots out there written on what to do about, during the holidays, and some things ours do something completely different. And when you have a lot of family members gathering together, your loved one might not be mentioned, which can be really difficult. And some families have a lot of alcohol involved, which could also exacerbate those holidays as well. So just the coming up to those days is challenging. And for many clients, it starts, for many of us, not all, we're all clients in so many respects, but before, Halloween comes, we go back in time with our own children, and the Christmas trees come out at the various stores, and so it's a constant reminder. And so that idea of getting through is what people strive for, of getting through, or bypassing it. And so that becomes an item as well. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's it's happy this, merry this, joyful this. There's an expectation, and it seems as though the whole world is in this wonderland, and here we are, still trying to sort of get ourselves out of the mud. And then again, having this expectation that we'll be there, we'll have a normal, and again, normal is no longer during the holidays. And so how do you do that? That's the best way that I know of anyway, is just to start communicating with people and letting them know this is going to be a different holiday, or we're going to do this instead, or some way of communicating with the family or the people closest to you. And if all else fails, it's come late and leave early.
Yes, yes. I think of the skill of, that cope ahead, that skill of what do I do? So you drive and have an out, and if you're choosing to go to a relative's home, I think that's important. Yeah.
I think it also really depends on where you are in your grief journey, and if your grief is very new and very raw, your expectations of what you will be able to do for this holiday season should be very, very, very low. Sometimes it's just getting through, at that stage of grief, getting through the minute and breathing through it. And so it is a time where people in grief, especially new grief, but all grief, have to be extremely good at self-care and have compassion for themselves and skip it if that feels right, do something different if that feels right. And eventually, I think as you get further in your grief, there is a way to integrate grief and celebration. So it doesn't have to be either or. And some ideas are going around the table and having everybody share a fun memory of your person who is no longer physically at the table. Lots of different ideas, but I think for the holidays and almost really every special day in grief, whether it's a birthday or an anniversary, the joy and the sorrow can exist side by side.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, all of you. And Deb, I like when you mentioned, and sometimes if the person who we're missing isn't mentioned, would you, because there was a question about kind of saying the person's name and so on, so would you recommend that, is it good to bring up, like, I like what Bridget said about going around the table, is there a way of doing that, bringing it up rather than not saying anything?
Well, it's a great question. Part of it is I think, depends where you're celebrating. So if it's in your own home, it may be very different than if it's in someone else's home. So I think that makes a difference. I'll speak for myself. After I lost my son, we put out his Christmas stocking, and his name's David. And so his Christmas stocking is always out during the holidays. But I think that's really hard because of other people's discomfort is what a griever navigates. And so that becomes the challenge during the holidays. And if there's children involved, all of those factors. So I think it depends if you feel safe in your environment. Safe as in, I don't mean physically safe, but if you feel emotionally safe in that environment, I think, sure, then, you bring up a memory or you mention something, and then I heard a term one time, the words of safe and welcoming. So we can be in an environment and we say their name, David, and how it's received, we find out, is it welcomed? And we quickly learn in grief, as we navigate grief, especially during the holidays. Well, for that matter, any family gathering. Any gathering that's more than 2 people becomes a challenge that you begin to navigate with that.
Thank you for sharing that.
I just wanted to add on to that. I think that there sometimes is a hesitancy on people to bring up the name because there might be a fear that they are going to sort of, you seem like you're having a good day, and they're going to remind you or make you sad, and you're going to cry. And if you do cry, that's a good thing. Crying is okay, and every time you cry, it releases something. And so I think we're getting better in our culture at acknowledging death and talking about it, but historically there was a reluctance to bring it up because it's maybe easier just not to.
I think a lot of, especially moms, feel a sense of their child is forgotten if the name isn't brought up. In certain safe places. So it's always that balancing of knowing who you're with and how they feel, and sometimes we as grievers have to put it out there first, unfortunately, to make other people comfortable, because we still, as far as we've gotten, there's still a discomfort in our culture with grieving people and grief in general. And yet we're all there, or have been there, or will be there.
Yes, thank you. Bridget, how about, can reaching out to someone you know who has experienced a recent loss help you in the grieving process?
I think that's an amazing idea, Dina. One of the things about the grief experience is that it is not something that we're supposed to experience alone. And it can feel extremely lonely. I have the experience of losing my daughter, Sophia, to a tragic car accident. And in the beginning, you really have a hard time even imagining that you can go on. The grief is so unbearable, and the idea of ever being happy again seems an impossibility. And for me, during that time, I was so lucky to have access to other mothers who had lost their children and were ahead of in their journey. And at first, what they were just able to offer me is just hope that here they are going on somehow and thriving, even in many cases. And it just gives you hope that it's possible. They know better than anyone else what you're going through, as much as your friends and your family. We had wonderful support of our friends and family, but it was still different than people who had walked the road in front of me and just knew there is something about not feeling alone that reaching out to somebody else who's gone through it gives you.
Helpful. Thank you. Coral or Deb want to share anything?
I will just add, I have for 11 years facilitated a suicide bereavement support group. And that is where, to echo what Bridget is saying, is in this support group, people gather because it offers hope. Somebody in not the same shoes, but very similar shoes, and we gather together, and it's suicide loss, which is a trauma loss, and that idea of hearing from another, someone who's maybe lost a spouse, a child, a sibling, we can sit there together and offer a different type of support that family or other family is unable to. And it offers reassurance, hope, connectiveness, community, and community, a huge part. So that's been, the hope part is what really resonates with me regarding that.
Oh, thank you. Coral, can journaling be an effective way of expressing your grief during the healing process?
I feel very strongly that it can be, not for everyone, but what it really, I think, offers most people is that, that sense of being alone or being lonely. When you journal, if you're feeling that, you can express yourself on those pages. It's private to you, things that you feel, that you want to say, that we just don't say things out loud all the time. They're all here or here, and to be able to put that on a piece of paper and see it there, I think it also speaks really well to that journey part, because if you start journaling as soon as you are able to sit down and put pen to paper, you can see your own process playing out. You can review it, you can go back to it, and while it's often a journey that is 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, the journaling part of it really helps us see it, see the changes that are occurring, record it, because grief, especially the shock involved with grief, will often we really struggle to remember, right? And to because we're just in that state, our brain just isn't functioning because it's grieving, and so sometimes to have that record too is really helpful to look back on and see just how far you've come and what has changed throughout, and just gives you time to process a little bit more in that private, quiet time again. I have had folks that have really found it helpful to journal letters to the person who has passed, and just that connection again, the physical person isn't there, but I can let you know what I did today, how I felt today, what happened today.
The continued bond.
Yeah, it keeps that continuing bond. Exactly.
Thank you.
We had, if I just
Please.
to add to Coral's, an idea that we entertained in our support group that I had this past couple of weeks. We talked about during Advent, which begins Friday, December 1st, in the Christian faith, is beginning with a memory each day. And writing down a memory, because people are somewhat lost on where do I begin? And does it have to be really formal? Do I have to have my penmanship, my grammar, all of those pieces? So we thought of, just doing a memory a day, and you could record it. Now with our iPhones, we can record, which is kind of cool. Record, you could handwrite it, you could even do artwork and draw something out, especially if it's younger children, that you could do a memory a day. So that's my intention for this Friday. You can hold me accountable to that.
I love it.
That,
great
because it
idea.
gives a place, and then those memories are with you.
Yeah, I love it. Deb, is grieving, and all of you, is grieving and mourning the same thing?
Oh, I like that one.
Bridget, you grab it. You grab it.
So grief is the internal process that happens when we lose something or someone that we love very deeply and are attached to. So grief is just what happens. It's usually very painful emotions, but it's internal. And mourning is the external expression of that grief. So in my view, mourning is really what takes us on the road to healing. So and there are so many different ways to mourn. Whenever we talk about the grief we're experiencing or the loved one, we are expressing our grief. When we have ceremony, we are expressing our grief. When we journal, we are mourning. When we cry, we are mourning. When we do yoga or meditate or pray, there are so many different ways to mourn. So I think the important thing is for people to figure out, for me, what works. For some people who just aren't journalers, that might not be their path to mourning, but they do need to figure out how do I get this grief out? Because the worst thing we can do with grief is hold it in, shove it down, numb it out.
Thank you. Thank you. Going back to Deb, your suicide support group is just beautiful and amazing, and I thought of something. One of the questions I wanted to pose, because I feel very passionate about it, is how words matter. We were talking about culture and words matter, and I had a experience earlier this year where my 13-year-old niece called me. There was a suicide attempt at her school, and my sister said, Brianna wants to talk to you, and I got on the phone right away that day, and the first thing that she asked me was, Auntie Dina, I remember that I shouldn't say committed suicide. What is the word that I should use? Deb, can you speak to this? Because I think that we need to talk about this more, because I don't think that a lot of people are aware.
So the terms have shifted. So we use terms such as died by suicide. We don't even say successful suicide, because there's nothing successful about that. People will say completed. However, died by suicide seems to be the one that people easily gravitate to. And the rationale being is because commit determines that there's a crime. And so it suggests that there was a crime involved. And so we've, really focusing on how words matter. In particular, because suicide is a stigmatized loss, and that perpetuates stigmatization, so to speak. And so really making the attempts to changing our verbiage in a society that continues to perpetuate stigma within mental health as it is, let alone suicide losses. And because of that, thinking of how families may not be quite as supported or feel quite as supported because of suicide. And so language is even more important. So thank you for that. Good.
Yes, thank you. And speaking of language, there was a question in here too about, I heard the word disenfranchised loss. Coral, do you know what that is referring to? And I believe
it's it's when there's a loss occurs and there's a disenfranchisement is the right word, but it's that disconnect of. I'll give you an example that might make it easier. So you've divorced, and your mother-in-law, your ex-mother-in-law, has died, and you had a good, close relationship with her, but you're sort of culturally not allowed to be at the funeral or to, why would you be mourning her? You divorced them. There's the why question, the judgment of, is this proper grief? Disenfranchised grief is, pet grief is incredibly, incredibly painful, but yet for a lot of folks, there's that sense of, well, it was just a dog. Well, if that dog was someone's lifetime companion, that's really tough to do, but yet, again, it's a cultural thing that we're often told we can't grieve. That's not correct grief. Does that, anybody have anything to add to that? That's how I see the disenfranchised piece of it, just that disconnect of
the disconnect is
not having the permission.
And I appreciate you mentioning pets. I facilitate a pet loss group online monthly through Insight, and that is definitely the theme of just feeling not heard or validated or respected over their grief.
enough.
It's not important. Just get another pet.
It also makes me just think about complicated grief. And when anybody dies and you love them, you experience grief, and it's very painful and it's messy and chaotic. But when somebody loses somebody in a tragic and traumatic way, it does feel different. It's different, a different feeling than, say, when my daughter was 18 and was in an accident versus the grief that I went through when my grandparents passed and they were in their 80s. And not to say that grief is painful, but it also can be complicated. And that kind of grief can last longer, can be more intense.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we're running low on time, and I definitely wanted to mention our favorite resources, but one question too. For viewers who want to reach out to someone grieving, what are the do's and don'ts? So I want you all to weigh in on this, if we can. Dr. Deb, the do's and don'ts, what are some?
Well, do's is reach out, whether it's through a card, phone call, text message now, a hot dish, something that says, I care. Don'ts, don't use euphemisms, platitudes, God needed another angel. And those are hurtful. Appreciate the family you have. All of those pieces that minimize a loss or that suggest that this won't last long for you. And so I think the don'ts are the things that sting. And so focus on do and look up. I had a friend of mine after my significant loss who, when my son died, who Googled what not to say. And I think that was beautiful. So,
I think and sometimes the reaching out is, especially I would thinking about that first year when you're just like not ready. That sometimes a pot of flowers on the front porch and we slip away. Maybe that's the Norwegian in me, I'm not sure. But that whole sense of just sort of giving them time and space, but also recognizing I'm here. I recognize what you're going through, but I'm not going to make you work when you're already struggling to get through this day by being social with me. I think that's another really good way to connect with people.
just a moment. Bridget, anything you'd want to share?
I would just say, do realize that in the raw stages of grief, love and support is what carries people. And so just find a way to show your love and support, and don't say, what can I do? Call me if you need anything, because they will never call.
That's it, yeah.
A favorite resource, real quick. And I see Deb has some, and I'm thinking of
I did.
Grieving is
Yep,
Loving.
Yep, Grieving is Loving,
a
Dr.
great one.
Joanne Cacciatore, excellent author.
I actually am really strongly committed to an organization called Healing Hearts Connection, which is a family grief camp, an overnight camp that just brings people together.
Great. Bridget?
I'm going to say Helping Parents Heal, which is an online organization, and it is for bereaved parents, and it helps them explore their mystical experiences together.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Deb Semmelroth, Coral Popowitz, and Bridget Benson for their time and expertise. Doctors on Call will be off the next 2 Thursdays for the holidays. Please join Dr. Peter Nalen for our show on January 4th, 2024 for a program on cancer prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. I'm Dina Clabaugh. From all the guests and crew here at PBS North, thank you for watching. Good night.